Hello, my name is Ashlee Jansen, and this is the first episode of the Death Dialogues. So I'm gonna go make some tea, and I'll be right back, and we'll chat.
I'm also gonna eat this orange while I'm waiting for my tea. This is so weird. We're just gonna talk about dying. I'm gonna eat an orange. Alright, so now I got my tea. We're gonna get ready.
Okay, so I have some notes here so I don't really go off track, but I am just going to explain a few things about me, and then we'll get right into why that's important for my death and dying journey. And so I earned my Bachelor of Science in Psychology at Acadia University last year in 2019. And I'll explain why I went into psychology and why that's important for my current studies, and why I am very interested in death and dying and all that comes with that. I also received my 200-hour yoga teacher training. So I'm a yoga teacher as well. I teach online and I teach the public. Right now we're in the era of COVID-19. So I'm not teaching in public, but I teach online. So physical activity was a huge part of my childhood. I was a baseball player and a gymnast. And that really shaped what my worldview was like the body and what we can do with the body and what we can't do with the body and our limits as a human body on earth. And it taught me a lot about other people. It taught me a lot about myself. So that was a huge part of my upbringing. I suffered from a lot of anxiety and fear and self-confidence issues. I didn't have a lot of self-confidence. I always thought that other people were judging me, and I got embarrassed really easily. Whenever someone would kind of pick at me, my face would get really red, and sometimes I would cry, and some people really enjoyed that reaction because that's what they wanted, and some people were really taken aback, like, oh, I didn't know that she was so sensitive. But as a young girl, I was very, very, very sensitive, and still am today sometimes. So yeah, I struggled with anxiety. I still struggle with anxiety. And when I retired from organized sport, I started running and doing yoga as a way to fill that void of the exercise that I was getting from gymnastics and baseball. So that kind of came in to my life, running and yoga, and I did that almost every day, and I loved it. But there were key things that I was missing from the sports that I was doing that I didn't really realize that I was missing until it was gone. So in high school, when I was done doing those sports and I was running and doing yoga, I developed very severe health anxiety. And it's just another way of saying that you're a hypochondriac. I was really, really sure that I would die suddenly in my sleep one night, or that I would be one day diagnosed with a terminal illness. So an illness that would give me like some kind of time that I would have until I would die. And I really struggled with this, and I still do struggle with it every once in a while, but it's a lot less now than it was. But back in high school, I remember going to the emergency room a lot. I remember being really upset before I had to go to bed and kind of saying goodbye to everyone before I went to bed, because remember, I was so sure that I was gonna die in my sleep. So that was something that was really hard on the relationship I was in at the time, and my family and my friends. And I was also really concerned about other people, and if there was anything wrong with someone else, if they were sick in any way, I would freak out and I would Google their symptoms and I would be convinced that they would die as well. So it wasn't just my health that I was really concerned with, I was also concerned about other people's health. And we'll get more into that as we go here. So I went on after high school to study psychology, and I wanted to particularly work with athletes that have anxiety and had self-confidence issues, because I had a lot of physical promise. And that physical promise couldn't really manifest because I was always in my head, and I was always thinking about what other people thought of me, and it really messed with my head. So when I would compete, I would get really, really, really anxious, and I wouldn't be able to do what my body could do. So I wanted to help others with that. So I went to study psychology, and when I went to university, I started going to therapy consistently every week to deal with
some childhood trauma
and my health anxiety. So I did that for 2 years consistently. Went to see a therapist every week, once a week. And yeah, it was good work, totally. And and a lot of that did resolve some childhood trauma for me. It did resolve some of the health anxiety as well. But throughout that, I was doing meditation and yoga to help relieve some stress, and especially sleep meditations. That was the only thing that really calmed me down, so that after I had that kind of intense anxiety of like, oh no, like I have to say goodbye to everybody, I would put on a sleep meditation, and that would kind of calm me down. And so yeah, I did sleep meditations and I did some yoga to help with that. So then I decided to become a yoga teacher, and I did that so that I could help people like me, people that were
severely anxious
and needed help to sleep or to just calm down during your day, and to really bring in some self-care to yourself instead of, because for a certain extent I kind of judged the anxiety I was feeling, and I felt that it kept me back from being at my best, being a good athlete or being a good student or doing the work that I needed to do. So I became a yoga teacher, and I got that certification last year so that I could teach others yoga and meditation. So what does all of this have to do with death and dying? So as a young child, I was very, very, very curious about death and dying. I always had a lot of questions, and when pets would die or a distant relative would die, I would ask a lot of questions about that, and I didn't understand how someone could be alive and then pass so suddenly. Someone could be here on Earth, and we could talk to them, and we could see them, and then not being able to do that anymore. Conceptually, I just couldn't understand that. And I really asked, like, why is that a thing? And I found that nobody could really answer any of these questions. All of the adults that I talked to, they would try to walk around the subject or distract me so that they wouldn't have to talk about it to me. And it was really hard because I wanted to know more about it, and I could tell that people and adults that I was talking to,
they were uncomfortable by it.
So over time, I noticed that whenever I would approach the subject, that people would get uncomfortable. And because of my lack of self-confidence and the thought that everyone was judging me, I stopped asking questions, and I started assuming that the reason why these questions weren't being answered was that it's a no kind of taboo that nobody wants to talk about, and that you shouldn't bring it up because it's gonna make other people feel bad. And yeah, so that was something that I dealt with as a child, as many do, because death and dying, it's such a sensitive subject. We don't want to think or talk about some of the most devastating points of life where our loved ones are here and we cherish them, and then someday they die. And that's not a fun experience, especially if you're the one staying on earth and you're going to miss them when they die. That's not a fun experience. Now, all of these experiences that I had as a child of, losing pets and kind of seeing friends and loved ones and their distant relatives die and talking to them about that, it really shaped what being alive would mean to me. And it also shaped what dying would mean to me as well. And I kind of liken it to always gripping on to what you want. And so when I got older and I experienced that severe health anxiety, that was like kind of trying to grip and have control over my life and having control over whether I would live or die, which we don't have that power. And it's difficult and it's hard, but we don't have that control. So I was really trying to control whether I lived or died, and I tried to control whether I knew if I was gonna die or live. So whenever I would go to bed, I would kind of instinctively believe that I would die, and so I would kind of make peace with that. But then, thinking about how other people would feel about my death was the biggest thing. And that kind of is indicative of what I thought about other things in my life. What are other people going to think if I do this? What are other people going to think if I do that? And I even thought, what would other people think if I died? And I would visualize my funeral, and I would visualize how my parents would feel, and it wasn't fun, and I put myself in so much anxiety before I would go to bed.
And I didn't have anybody to talk to about this.
Because I always felt like someone else, if I would talk to them about it, they would be like, well, that's not going to happen for a long time, or we don't have to worry about that, and, dying is just something that happens, which is true. But I didn't take any comfort in that. I needed somebody to talk me through what it actually meant to die. And that it was a natural experience that all of us have to go through at some point. And whether you live today and die tomorrow, there's no moral hierarchy to that. There's no, if you die tomorrow, that it's more sad or not. And what I mean by that is that I always felt guilty if I were to die, that my family would hurt so much and miss me so much. And that would be true. Why is that a bad thing? And I think that for me, the bad thing was that I didn't want my parents to hurt so much. I wanted them to know that when I die, I want them to live their lives. And of course they're gonna be sad.
Of course.
But I'm still wrapping my head around this because I am just a girl, a woman who's afraid to die. I'm still
Afraid to die.
and the fact is that death is the second, it's second in fears in Canada and the US. We are absolutely afraid of death, although everybody goes through it. Why is that? The first leading fear is public speaking, and that's something that pretty much all of us are going to have to do, and we're coached on that. So I'm going to end it on that note today, but we're going to continue to explore and talk about death and dying, and I'm going to talk about the things that I struggle with, and I'm going to talk about the taboos of death and dying and how we can help each other out to kind of explore in a way that, you know,
helps us figure things out.
because nobody really knows what the next kind of step is after death, but we can be sure of how we plan for it and how we that we die with grace, especially if you're dying in old age. Unfortunately, some people die very tragically, but if you're somebody that happens to be lucky enough to live a very long life, you will be able to choose the way that you die and choose the kind of atmosphere that you die in. And even kind of thinking about that comfort, even though maybe that's not the reality of what my death might be like, even planning it and taking comfort in maybe a fantasy of how my death might be is comforting to me, because it's kind of like my plans are personalized, and I'd have music and I would have crystals and have all of those really nice things that make me me. And that's kind of how I want to be remembered. I want to be remembered with a teacup in hand and some crystals and some music. And that's how I would die. So yeah, we're gonna explore some pretty heavy topics, and I want to kind of
Talk about anything.
I don't want anything about death and dying to be off limits. I think that kids are so curious about this, and they know it happens. They know. So I want to talk about it all. So if you have any questions, if you want to talk about this more with me, definitely send me a direct message. And yeah, we can chat, and I'll chat more about my experience with exploring death and dying in my own right and with others, because right now I'm actually taking an end-of-life doula course as well, and that's what I want to do when this whole COVID thing is over. I want to help people die in the best way that they can, and I want to help their families kind of get ready for that with them and hold space for them when they tell me their fears about this stuff, because I never had that when I was young, and I would love to do that for other people. So that's why I'm doing this, and I will talk to you guys next time.